Hello, my name is Matt Kondraty. I'm with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and I'd like to thank Rick Laughlin for inviting me to be a part of this symposia. My presentation is a guidance document for reviewing whitewater park projects, and my co-authors are Kendall Bakich, Eric Richer, Dan Kowalski, and Bill Atkinson. What's a whitewater park? Well, if you've seen some of the talks earlier, whitewater parks are recreational features formed in rivers that create a surf wave or hydraulic jump that are really fun to play in, especially in the summertime, popular with tubers, stand-up paddle boarders, and kayakers. And the way they work is they are formed by primarily one of two ways: through a drop or chute type structure. In Colorado, these are two common structures we encounter. The chute type structure consists of two grouted wing walls that pinch or constrict the river channel into a narrow opening with a kind of gradually sloping chute that enters a static pool. And as the water enters that static pool, it forms a hydraulic jump, kind of a vertical eddy that creates a great fun surf wave. And then the drop type of structure is a more abrupt, steep slope that drops into a plunge pool, creates a little bit different hydraulic characteristics, but nonetheless very fun for people that like to recreate on them. So why are there so many whitewater parks in Colorado? You may have heard that Colorado is a epicenter of whitewater park development in the country. Well, primarily the history of whitewater parks started with the development of RISIDs, or recreational in-channel diversions, which are unique to Colorado. It's a form of in-channel water right that is an in-channel diversion. So it means the water never leaves the channel, but it's tied to specifically non-motorized boating recreation and to a control structure, which functionally is often served as a whitewater park structure. As I mentioned, Colorado has more whitewater park structures than anywhere else in the country. We have 27 existing whitewater parks with 7 more proposed across the state. And so this motivated us as Parks and Wildlife to develop a guidance document with the prolific development of whitewater parks. Why would we develop a whitewater document? Well, first of all, we wanted to provide uniform guidance for our state. Because Colorado is a headwater state, we actually have 2 different Corps of Engineer districts, the Omaha and Albuquerque districts, and 4 regulatory offices. Just a little while ago, we actually had 3 different districts if we included Sacramento, but that's since changed. So we have some potential for differences among those different districts. So we wanted to have develop this guidance document to help with continuity. Another reason for a guidance document was we were wanting to create a tool that would help us select the least environmentally damaging practical alternative that would guide us to selection. So this consists of a stepwise tool for selecting whitewater park locations. American Whitewater in 2007 said it's our policy that natural unmodified river channels should not be modified for the creation of whitewater parks. And we as Colorado Parks and Wildlife agree with that statement. So how do we find locations that are suitable for whitewater parks? Well, we developed this site selection tool that we work through a series of questions to help determine the most appropriate or least impactful site. As you go through the tool, as you answer questions and you work from top to bottom, the degree of risks increases with respect to fish passage and potential for impacts to fish habitat as you go further down the tool, further deeper into the questions. So within Colorado, we've looked at the existing whitewater park locations, and 22 out of the 27 sites are located in channels that have a slope of less than 2%. That we would consider riffle pool type channels, which would be consistent with a Rosgen classification of a C or F. 2 of those out of the 27 are step pool type of systems with a greater than 2% channel slope, and 3 are unknown. So because of this is overwhelming number of whitewater park structures located in low gradient type of streams, we are concerned about the potential for especially fish passage impacts for fish swimming species that are not known to be jumpers or to be able to burst or swim at higher rates, such as trout. So another reason that we wanted to develop this guidance document was to summarize research on the potential for impacts to fish habitat, fish passage, anglers, and natural river processes. So this is a little bit of a summary of what you'll find in that document. We did a study looking at habitat suitability at a site in Lyons on the northeast part of the state. We identified a reach that was consisted of 6 or 7 whitewater park pools. We measured in those pools in terms of their depths and widths and did detailed topographic surveys to construct actually some hydraulic models. This is an example of a natural pool reach that was located just upstream, and the benefit of this study was both the whitewater park reach and the reach that consisted of natural pools were very similar in terms of their channel slope and valley type of characteristics. So after we collected our detailed topographic surveys, we used a 3-dimensional model that developed through software called Flow 3D to look at develop the models that would predict velocity and depth, and that information we could use to then transfer to use published habitat suitability criteria, and along with those modeling results to determine the suitability of those pools within the whitewater park and natural reaches. So what we did was we looked at all 3 pools in the whitewater park reach and 3 pools in the natural channel reach, and we determined the percent of good habitat in terms of a percentage of area at 3 different discharges. And then we used t-tests and Wilcoxon tests to determine significance, whether there was a difference between the whitewater park and natural pool characteristics. So here's an example of some of the results from that study. This is for adult rainbow trout and the percent of good adult rainbow habitat on the y-axis. On the x-axis are 3 different discharges. The stars represent statistically significant differences. And as you can see, the whitewater park pools looked like they had a higher percentage of good habitat. What's interesting is then 3 years we conducted sampling within of these same exact pools that we modeled, and our actual observed data for adult rainbow trout density, or the number per reach, showed the natural pools actually had higher numbers of adult rainbows than the whitewater park pools, which is exactly the opposite of what we would have predicted using habitat suitability. So next we wanted to look at habitat in terms of variability in velocity profile. So we used an acoustic Doppler current profiler, or ADCP, to look at measuring the velocity distribution at a fixed cross section and over time. So what we did is we set up a fixed cross section, and this is results now showing what the variability in velocities look like at a cross section. So this is over time. So at time step 1, this is a picture of the natural pool at a fixed site. Time step 2, time step 3. Then we computed the variability in space across those 3 different cross sections over 3 different time steps, and came up with the variance. And you can see the variance we came up with there. Then we did the same thing for whitewater park pools, and the dark, I should mention, the red regions are the regions of highest velocity, dark blue are lowest velocity. Focus on the red regions, you can see that region with the highest velocity is shifting quite a bit over time in space. And you can see the variance for that is orders of magnitude higher for the whitewater park pool than as compared to the natural pool, which has consequences for trout, for instance, that are balancing feeding and resting in terms of a bioenergetics sense. So hydraulics in summary, comparing whitewater parks versus natural pools, depths of whitewater park pools were twice as deep, The velocity was 3 times greater in whitewater parks, and turbulence 6 times greater, vorticity twice as great, and then that surging effect, that was the effect we measured in terms of velocity variability using the ADCP, was 40 times higher in whitewater park pools. So next we looked at habitat in terms of riffle habitat by looking at longitudinal profiles and fish abundance. So this is the longitudinal profile of the whitewater park reach. The blue surface represents the bed, the bottom of the surface of the bed. The red line is water surface, and you can see from this profile there's no real riffle habitat. All of the riffle habitat has been converted to steep drops over each of the individual whitewater park structures, compared to the natural reach, which is located upstream. And you can see there's a much larger percentage of riffle habitat. You can really pick out where those riffles are located by looking between the pools. And then I've identified on these profiles the location of the upper, middle, and lower pools that were both modeled for hydraulic purposes and sampled. So what happens when riffles are removed? This is an example showing biomass of brown trout in pounds per acre on the y-axis, and the upstream, middle, and downstream pools. And you can see that the further you get away from the last intact riffle at the upstream end of the reach, you get fewer and fewer brown trout and less brown trout biomass in each of the pools. So it's possible that there's a cumulative effect of riffle due to riffle loss, at least in terms of fish brown trout biomass. Next, we did a fish passage study where we pit tagged 2,500 individual fish and monitored them for a year. And we found that the structures do not function as a complete barrier to trout and suckers, but they were up to 34%. They formed a 34% or so reduction in upstream movement over time. We also did happen to measure or document a single longnose dace that moved past one whitewater park structure over the course of a year, but we aren't sure if it was in the belly of a brown trout. So comparing the estimates that we derived from pit tagged fish data over that year, comparing the different structures that we studied versus the reference condition of an unimpeded riffle on the right, you'll notice that there was a lot of variability based on the structure design. So for this particular whitewater park structure, it's a drop type structure with an abrupt vertical drop. You'll notice the movement probability, which is plotted on the left axis, y-axis, is actually decreases with increasing fish length. Whereas the reference site from the unimpeded natural reach shows that movement probability increases with increasing length. In contrast to that result, a whitewater park structure in the middle section of the whitewater park reach was wide at the top of the structure, and as you went through the chute, it narrowed down and got more and more narrow just before it entered the pool. So wide to narrow from upstream to downstream. And what we saw was actually an impediment for smaller fish, where say fish that were 200 millimeters or smaller had difficulty moving through this structure as compared to the larger fish sizes, and certainly compared to the reference reach. And then lastly, if the design of the uppermost structure, which was a chute type structure, was actually narrower at the top and wider as it moved downstream. So the opposite, it flared out and got wider as it got closer to the pool downstream before it entered. We actually saw the movement probability rates for fish in those size categories were closest to the reference condition in that unimpeded natural reach. Next, we looked at whitewater parks and their potential influence on anglers. So we've done creel surveys or angler interviews for both in Wyoming and Colorado and asked them a number of questions. And what they consistently ranked to be the highest or most important to them was being outdoors, to be able to relax and get away from people. And they rated this even higher than catching good fish, tasting fish, or landing a trophy fish, which is interesting. Those characteristics, though, are in contrast, kind of with whitewater parks, which are designed to generate or spectating type of locations and generate crowds. So unfortunately, kind of difficult to be compatible with our anglers. In the Colorado River, we have a healthy sport fish fishery consisting of rainbow brown cutthroat trout and whitefish, as well as a healthy native fish fishery, including sculpin, dace, round-tailed chub, and flannelmouth suckers, and as well as blueheads. On the Roaring Fork River, which is a tributary of the Colorado River, there's a whitewater park being proposed on that river, and it consists currently of a gold medal trout fishery, which we define as the highest level of sport fish for trout in terms of biomass and density, and also native fish. There's a healthy native fish component to that river. So in Glenwood Springs, actually statewide, angling is second only to the ski industry in terms of economic impact for our state. And then Garfield County, where Glenwood Springs is located, there's $26 million estimated earned from angling annually. And Glenwood Springs has been rated the #1 fishing town in America by Field and Stream magazine in 2008. So we did a angler survey or creel study in 2013, and we interviewed anglers and asked, how have your fishing habits changed in relation to fishing in the vicinity of the existing whitewater park on the Colorado River? And 30% of the Colorado River anglers fish less often or left that stretch of river entirely in the vicinity of the whitewater park. 35% of the Roaring Fork anglers that we interviewed fished less often or left that stretch of the river completely. Then we asked the question, would the proposed whitewater park impact your fishing to both Colorado and Roaring Fork anglers? The Colorado River anglers, 22% of them said they would fish less often or move away if a whitewater park was constructed on the Roaring Fork. And 28% of the Roaring Fork anglers that were interviewed said they would fish less often or move away from the whitewater park area if it would be constructed. Another issue we see and have to deal with related to whitewater parks are excessive sediment. There often are issues related to the spacing of pools that are often too close in proximity related to what you'd expect to find based on natural channel design or observation, and also contraction expansion issues with abrupt expansions followed by really narrow constrictions that can create those sediment depositions, which would require maintenance in order to get them to function as intended. And then also potentially a loss of riparian vegetation due to bank armoring and boulders placement. We also provide some other helpful guidance in the document, including advice or guidance on how to monitor whitewater parks, best management practices, how to interact with fish managers, and these fact sheets, including one on whitewater park studies and fish passage at river structures that includes some criteria for fish swimming and jumping. That is really helpful to pass out to the public or stakeholders who are interested in learning more about whitewater parks. So some issues for discussions. Where do whitewater parks belong? For instance, site selection is definitely one of the topics that we should be discussing and debating. Also, how should whitewater parks be regulated? There seems to be some evidence that maybe regulations could be different if a whitewater park is proposed to replace an existing fish barrier, such as a dam, versus in an unconfined natural channel. And then for some states, like in Colorado or Wyoming, we have developed a stream quantification tool for stream mitigation and habitat condition assessment. Potentially, this could be used to determine the potential for functional lift or loss from whitewater park development. And lastly, what about site selection scoring from the SQT, where we can get a score such as functioning at risk, or not functioning, as classification tool for where, again, the appropriate sites for whitewater park development. In summary, there's a lot of different paths we can consider as we think about the future of whitewater parks and their development on rivers. Ultimately, we hope that we can come up with some common ground and solutions that won't lead to us to having to divide our multiple uses and think of rivers as needing to compartmentalize them, such as in this picture. And we hope to be able to come up with solutions that will ultimately benefit natural rivers, the function of natural rivers and fisheries, as well as recreation. Thank you.